Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for taking time out of your day today to join us this evening for the presentation, the Bredesen Protocol, Strategy to Treat Those with Dementia. My name is Brenda Moynihan, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Outreach at the Kensington Assisted Living located in White Plains. If you'd like some information about the Kensington, we are an enhanced assisted living. Our phone number is 914-390-0080, and our website is www.thekensingtonwhiteplains.com. Feel free to go to the website. There's lots of good information there. I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Kerry Mills Rutland. And before Kerry starts, I'd like to read you her bio. Kerry is a national board certified health and wellness coach, as well as an author, lecturer, and best practices educator, serving communities and individuals for nearly 2 decades in navigating cognitive decline due to dementia. Certified as a Bredesen Protocol practitioner since 2017, Carrie assists clients in integrating the protocol's process for optimum brain function. She has witnessed remarkable results in stemming the onset of decline, as well as reversal of symptoms to varying degrees. Carrie earned recognition in the field of Alzheimer's care as a former New York regional manager for a pioneering group in the study of caring for people with dementia. In 2011, Carrie opened Engaging Alzheimer's LLC, expanding her reach in helping families that have loved ones with declining cognition. In 2021, Carrie opened a new practice, Age Well Simply, geared to the integration of lifestyle medicine in the prevention as well as intervention of cognitive decline. Carrie, author, lecturer, speaker, mother, and wife. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Bren. Thank you so much, Jean. So as we get started, I want to just start by saying thank you to you guys. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you to all of you who are here with us right now. This topic has been obviously very exciting to me as somebody who has worked with a couple thousand people who have some sort of cognitive decline. The fact that there's a strategy that can really be beneficial to them has been life-changing for so many people, and I'm delighted at the opportunity to talk about that with you guys tonight. So for starters, I just want to thank again Gina and Brenda for putting this all together. So let's get started. Who is Dr. Bredesen? Dr. Bredesen is a neuro researcher. So he started his work nearly 30 years ago. He's out in California. He was a traditional researcher. He was researching the brain. He was looking for solutions to Alzheimer's disease in particular. He was doing a lot of the same things that many of the drug companies are doing, trying to understand the nuances related to Alzheimer's disease. He too was seeing some of the challenges that other people were seeing with all this amyloid plaque, etc. Around the same time that it was becoming common knowledge that amyloid plaque may not be the problem, but might be sort of the secondary thing that cues us, he had actually switched gears. Dr. Bredesen said, you know what, I'm going to, rather than sit here and try to figure out how I can stop the amyloid plaque from developing, I'm going to start looking at what's in the brain that shouldn't be. And so he basically, looked at all of his autopsy reports and all the new autopsies that he was doing and was looking at what shouldn't be in a brain, whether it was low hormones or viruses or a dental microbiome that shouldn't be in the brain. He was looking at that specifically, and he thought to himself and with his team, if we could help people cure this stuff or get rid of it while they're still alive, would it impact their brain? And so that was sort of where he came from. He's a one of the most decent human beings you'll probably ever hear about. He's probably in his mid-60s and said to me about 2 years ago that his goal before he leaves this planet is to come up with a protocol for every neurodegenerative disease out there. I mean, I just think of my own ambition now, and it doesn't even match that. So he's really somebody who's just driven to see people have success. He cares about each and every person who goes through this protocol and would do anything to help them, including all of the practitioners. So that was where he came from, and so now naturally we would refer to this as his protocol. So the details of it, right? As I started to say, he focuses on the protocol itself, focuses on the root cause. So again, why, we often say we don't know where Alzheimer's comes from, and yet we have tons of research that show the benefits of exercise, the benefits of a different diet. We know that, we know what drug interactions can do to somebody's brain. We know that things like hydrocephalus can cause a person to have dementia. Some people it does, some people it doesn't. We know that viruses, not just like herpes or those type, but even let's look at the side effects that have been happening due to COVID, right? So we just know that so much of what affects the body can also affect the brain. So again, that's where the focus is, right? Looking at things that people are living with today and what can be addressed. The protocol itself, part of what I love about it is that it's not, throw everything at the wall, do a Hail Mary, cross your fingers and hope it works. It's the opposite of that, quite frankly. It starts with really looking at blood work and evaluating a person's cognition, taking into account a person's health history as well as their functioning. Where did they work? Where did they live? What kind of job did they do? What hours of the day did they work, right? Sort of really taking into consideration a person's life. It's well documented that a person develops Alzheimer's disease 20 years before we start seeing it. That is common knowledge across all scientists. And so again, right, what I'm doing today in my 40s is impacting how my life will be in the 60s. What I'm doing in my 50s, 60s impacts my 70s, 80s. And so that's why I look at everything sort of from the start of somebody's life all the way until where they're at currently. And then from there, we're looking at to treat suboptimal or abnormal results, right? So some of the basics, again, that are common knowledge are vitamin D and B12, very easy examples. We know that both of those two vitamins have a huge impact on the functioning of the brain. We measure them in blood work. If they don't match up, person takes supplements, all of a sudden, recheck blood work goes, check, right? Now it's in an optimal level. The other thing about that is that it's not just looking at the lab ranges, but it's really looking at what's optimal for the brain. So for instance, if vitamin D says that, we should be 50 to 80 and somebody's sliding in at 51, right? We're going to be saying, well, gee, let's get that up a bit more, right? We don't function as suboptimal people. We want to function who are in an optimal state. So it's very cause and effect, right? If this is exactly what I'm seeing, there's something very distinct that I can do to treat it. Again, because everything is measured in blood, it also is able to be managed a lot more clinically and directly than just say, take these herbs and they'll be good for you, but really there would be no way to measure it. In addition to the labs and so supplements that would be taken, there's a whole lifestyle component. And so it's about adjusting that lifestyle so that it improves cognitive function. These are things that work for every one of us every day. So sleep is one of them. I know for myself, if I get a good sleep, I function a whole lot better. I bet if I asked every single one of you who are here today, you would all agree that the same is true. So when we look at lifestyle, we're looking at how do we maximize each area, and we'll go through what those areas are in a couple minutes once we get to a little further in the presentation. And then the thought process is, it's not normal that Alzheimer's disease would stop in its progression. There's not one medication out there right now that can do that. You probably heard of a case where somebody's Alzheimer's disease just stopped. And so with this protocol, the first thing that we look for is actually just stabilization. If we can actually help somebody just become stable and stop declining, then it's two things. One, we've succeeded, right, by itself. But two, it tells us that we're down the right path. And so if we continue down that path, then the second goal that we would be looking for would be to help a person restore cognition to whatever degree that is possible. Naturally, the earlier somebody starts, especially if somebody does this for prevention, the success looks a lot different than somebody who might be already be further along. So obviously the big question is, how is this different, right? And it's probably already your mind is percolating some ideas of how it's different, but a few things that are very distinct. So the first one is that it's not a pill. This is not a silver bullet. This is not, even just take these handful of silver bullets and things will be changed. Furthermore, if you look at this slide, I've gone through the timeline of medications as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. This past summer, we actually had the newest drug that was approved, and if you followed any of that, it was extremely controversial. The reason being, it actually didn't prove successful. What happened was they said, we need a new drug. Let's see if this one will work, and we'll look back in 7 years. And so some of the side effects that have come out since then have been quite damaging. You talk to most doctors, and especially neurologists, and they're very reluctant to just get people started on it. So, but this is pretty much the timeline. As you can see, prior to the drug this past summer, it was actually since 2007 that we hadn't had a new drug. Namzaric, the one that came out in 2014, is actually just a combination of Namenda and Aricept. And so when we think about this protocol, a lot of times people say it's hard or it's complex or it's all these other things. And I think part of the reason is simply because I don't know that there will ever be one pill that could do this, right? Why is it that it's a 49-year-old man is getting the same disease, but it looks totally different than an 86-year-old woman, right? Why for some people does it start with memory and others it's more just like a state of confusion, or they don't have the words? Why for some people, do they become really kind of sedate and then just really anxious, and other people are like, manic practically, right? Why is it that there's so many different symptoms to try to define this one disease? We all think of dementia or Alzheimer's disease as the forgetting disease, but there's a lot more that goes into it. And so that's the reason that I don't believe that there would ever be just one pill. Not that I really ever did think that, but it also makes sense when you line up a group of people that have it, and everybody looks a little bit different. In fact, there was a phrase that was used and still is used in the industry for years that says, if you've seen one person with Alzheimer's, you've seen one with Alzheimer's. So it was partly so we would treat each person individually, but it was partly because everybody is different. And so that's one of the first main differences. The second one that I think is really important is that most drugs look to treat a problem, right? So these medications that we were just looking at, they're there to treat the brain by getting rid of brain pieces, right? So Aricept in particular is an example. The job is to pull away amyloid plaque. Super. And then the studies come out and show us that people who never developed Alzheimer's disease at an autopsy at, age 92 had plenty of amyloid plaque, but they never had any signs of dementia, right? So we have this drug that's pulling away something that we then later find out is actually believed to be something that protects the brain. So rather than so it could be effective potentially for some people, right? For at least for a time. What this protocol does, though, is it doesn't look to just fix broken pieces. It looks to get to what broke the brain and begin fixing it at that level. So it's just a different approach. For instance, if I had a little shop and I had somebody stealing from the register, right, I might fire the person who was stealing. But if the next one starts stealing and the next one starts stealing, probably what I would do is put a different system in place or identify, wow, how is it that they steal so easily? And then I would fix it at that level. That's what this protocol is about. It's about getting to the root cause and addressing it at that level rather than just, kind of putting Band-Aids on it and trying to make things a little bit better for a period of time. The third thing about this protocol, which just dovetails and everything I've said, is that it's a very workable checklist. So it's about you. This protocol is looking at your blood work, it's looking at your genetics, it's looking at your lifestyle, it's looking at how your body responds to all of these different things. And so it's not just a ton of information. There is no shortage, it turns out, of books and articles and blogs and vlogs that you can read that will talk to you about good health, right? Part of what I found confusing for many years was all of the differing information, right? So I would hear about fat and it was a bad thing, and then I would hear fat was a good thing. But the truth is that there's more to that sentence, right? Some people say walking is good and some people say swimming is good. Yeah, depending on the person, right? All of these things, they're sort of this general slew of information, then we don't always know how to apply it to ourselves. And so while the information is awesome, the next step is how do you apply it, right? And we're living in an age, obviously, of information overload. So that's even part of the challenge as well, right? We're inundated with blogs and people's newsletters that are giving us all this information. And our challenge isn't even that we don't read it. Our challenge is, okay, now how do I apply that to my life? And so this protocol is about taking all of that information and sort of sweeping through the noise for you. So you don't have to be the one who's figuring all of that out. It's looking at these things as they relate to you and then giving you your game plan so that you can go on and have success with taking the best care of yourself without, kind of doing everything under the sun. And then the fourth thing about this protocol, and I'm not saying medication doesn't work, it has a role. But what this protocol does is it works. We're looking at the root cause. We're looking to see, can that root cause be treated? And then we need people to be compliant. When those three things happen, since 2014, when Dr. Bredesen published his very first paper, it had 10 people. It was tiny. Everybody said, oh, it's 10 people. Well, 9 out of 10 of them went on to live an extremely functional life. Many of them still being alive and functioning well to this day. So that was in 2014. In 2018, there was a study that had physicians from around the country, and they all put in about different patients that they had, and it's called the 100-patient paper. And so it's 100 people around the country that had success with this protocol using different practitioners from around the country. So not working with Dr. Bredesen himself. And then this past October, it's in the process right now being peer reviewed, but there was a researcher in the San Diego area, and she worked with 3 physicians, and they had 25 people in their study. It all hit in the throes of COVID. So right in the middle of it was the middle of COVID, and their success rate was 84%. And this is tested not just by somebody saying, oh yeah, I'm sure that person's doing better, but very specific. So neuropsych testing, volumetric MRIs, meaning a volumetric is they look at the brain and it gets broken down into each section and you can compare volume. So for instance, the hippocampus, maybe it starts out at 20%. That's a very forgetful person. And we see it grow to 25%, right? That's increase in that volume of the brain, showing them that person, we should see it in real life, but we can absolutely see it in the scan. So that's how this protocol, that's the success that it's having. So those are kind of the 4 things that, like, what is it and what isn't it? It's not a pill. It's a program that works. We'll get to the side effects in a small bit. And it's doable for anybody because it's so customized. So what is it, right? What is involved in the Bredesen protocol? What does it actually look like? So many of you have probably read about this term, know a little bit about a term called neuroplasticity. And basically what it means is that the brain is actually able to regain the ability to make what we call synaptic connections. So one neuron talks to the other. What takes place in between is called synaptic connection. Many years ago, we actually didn't believe that was possible to regrow them. In fact, we didn't learn it until the last 10 years that it was possible for the brain to actually grow. We believed that whatever we were born with, right, we're born with 100 billion neurons, we believed that was it. And so since then, what we've learned is that with the right training and the right push and the right brain training, etc., right nutrients and everything else, that the brain actually is able to regrow itself. And so it's given us hope on many levels, right? People with a stroke, people with a traumatic brain injury, soldiers who are coming back after having some real trauma. And awesome for us, it's also true for people who have damage due to Alzheimer's disease and some of the other forms of dementia. So specifically, we call them the Bredesen 7. So there's 7 aspects that we're paying attention to. The first one is nutrition. So when you think about, again, we're relating this to the brain, right? So we want good, healthy fat. So we're talking olive oils and nuts and seeds. We're talking about avocados, right? Things that are rich in fat. Some people have heard about Mct oil, sort of the magic that's on the shelf. Mct oil is a form of coconut oil, coconuts are high in fat, which is why that is often, it helps people get rid of brain fog. What's happening is that the brain then creates ketones when you have everything sort of systematically in the right place, which is the best for the brain. So it's either fueling from fat or fueling from carbs as we know them. Glucose is the other word that gets used. So when we're eating these good fats, it's creating an insulin sensitivity, which many of us have lost over time, as well as it's helping to create the right energy. So the diet is about eating high fats, good quality. So I'm not talking about burgers, I'm not talking about bacon, I'm not talking about cheese, I'm not talking about fried food, right? We're talking about predominantly, as best it can, we're talking about unsaturated, good, wholesome fat. Tons of veggies. It cannot be emphasized enough. And a whole variety. Eat as many as you can. You want 3/4 of your plate to be filled up with all kinds of good vegetables. Wild caught fish. So when we're looking then at the different protein sources, we'd want wild caught fish, never farmed fish. Farmed fish is probably one of the most unhealthy things, period, that we can eat. Even if it's responsibly farmed, it's still farmed. Grass-fed beef. So again, we are what our animals eat, right? So if I'm eating food, where the beef has been filled with hormones and antibiotics, and it's being fed, vegetarian feed that's corn and other things that cows don't normally eat, then the cow is getting inflamed, and the cow has extra hormones, and the cow has all these things, and I'm eating that. So naturally, then my body is going to have some of the side effects that perhaps that cow would. So that's why we're looking for grass-fed beef and chickens that get to just run around. So you see them a lot of times when you're looking at eggs, right, it will say free range, it will say organic, it will say pasteurized. Pasteurized just means that the chickens got to roam around free and eat worms and bugs as well as grass and whatever their feed was. So that's what we would be looking for there. And then it's a no dairy diet, so cheese, yogurt, milk. Dairy itself is inflammatory. It causes the body to enter into a state of inflammation. So that's why that's on the table. Gluten has a side effect of that as well. So many people can just be gluten sensitive, and so that's off the diet. Obviously nothing that's genetically manufactured, because then it isn't actually food. And then berries, seeds, fruits. And then there's one other component, which is, you might have heard of it referred to as intermittent fasting. It's really not as complicated as it sounds. So provided you're not somebody who gets up to midnight snack, most of you, hopefully, fast every day for 7 to 8 hours, right? Because you're not eating while you're sleeping. That period would be considered fasting. And so intermittent fasting just means the time that you add to that sleep time. So for instance, if I finish eating at 8 o'clock at night and I don't eat the next morning and I don't have breakfast until 8 a.m., I just fasted for 12 hours, right? That's kind of what this intermittent fasting is. And depending on a person's genetics can make that range from 12 to 16, sometimes 18 hours. Again, there's times you don't want to fast, more than 12 hours. So that's why it's also important to know what your body needs to be doing, what your genetics are showing, what your lab work is showing, so that we're not putting somebody in harm's way by just throwing a general protocol out there. The second area would be exercise. And so HIIT workouts, you might have heard of them, HIIT. They stand for high interval intermittent training and high intense interval training. And so what it means is that if I ran up the stairs, I get to the top of the stairs, I'm a little bit out of breath, I might just wait until I can finish breathing, or I walk back down the stairs and I run right back up, right? And the idea is that each time my body is having to work a little bit harder to recover. It's causing a whole bunch of shifts and changes within my muscles and my breathing and my heart. And so doing forms of intermittent training, or of HIIT training, will actually improve overall functioning for blood flow. And so that's helpful for the brain for obvious reasons. Obviously, you wouldn't just want to run out and do that. I don't know your health. I don't even know who you are, so you wouldn't want to just take that at face value. But instead, you would want to ask your doctor if they have any objections. You know yourself, right? Maybe you push yourself a little bit, that sort of thing. Do what's right for you, but if you have any concerns, obviously you'd want to ask your physician. 5 to 6 days of aerobic. The truth is, we don't move. right? We as human beings these days, especially COVID, especially being home, especially sitting in front of our computers, we're just not people who move very frequently anymore. You've probably heard of the SAD diet, the standard American diet. I've actually called it now the SAL, the standard American lifestyle, right? It's just sort of how we function these days. And so, we don't eat right, we eat late, we snack, we're, eating things that might not be good for us, we're not moving anymore. We have way too much screen time. Our stress is through the roof. We don't get enough sleep. We don't even necessarily value it, right? This whole thing has sort of become the general lifestyle. And so exercise plays the part in that of just moving, right? Getting out and moving. So even just doing a walk in your neighborhood for half an hour, 45 minutes a day is a huge win. Like just getting out and moving, doing regular stretching. Again, it just keeps the body nimble, right? We want to be able to move around. We don't want to get easily hurt. And so stretching is important. And then the other one, oddly enough, sometimes we don't realize it, is weights. Weight resistance is actually good for the brain. So again, all of these things I'm talking about, this stuff has come out over the last 20 years. This isn't specific to Dr. Bredesen's protocol. What Dr. Bredesen did is he said, when we look at these 7 things together and we optimize all of them, that's when we truly begin to have success. I can't tell you how many awesome exercise programs and benefits that I have seen from people with Alzheimer's just exercising. In fact, it's been a recommendation of mine for the last 20 years that if you want to combat behaviors, especially in the afternoon for people with Alzheimer's, have them start exercising. Have them start moving around. A balloon, get it out, put the music on, start tossing it around, get people up, take them for a walk. You know why? They get rid of all this energy and all of a sudden they're calmer, and so it changes behavior. I did it for those reasons. I wasn't even thinking about the benefits that it might do to the brain. That was before, all of this understanding. So as you're starting to see, I'm not bringing up things that are like so out there and who in the world would do that and where in the world would that come from, right? These are normal things that are that the Bredesen protocol just says we have to do them all, right? We have to incorporate all of them. So that's the second one. The third one is sleep. So this is probably one of the most overlooked areas. Generally, we kind of are a society that thinks that if we can get 5 to 6 hours of sleep, we should be able to be okay. Right? We've all seen the Kramer episode of where Kramer says, oh, you know what? I'm going to sleep for 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, 20 minutes on. I mean, Kramer was crazy to begin with, right? That was partly why we all loved him. And then on top of that, Kramer not sleeping, right, was hysterical. Yeah, I don't want to function that way in real life, and I don't want you to have to function that way in real life either. So recognizing that it's actually true that our bodies need 7 to 8 hours of sleep every single night. It's when rest and restoration and repair take place, not only in the body, but that's when it takes place in the brain. That's when our brain is actually able to get rid of garbage, is when we're sleeping. So that's why also eating right up until you go to sleep interferes with that system, which is why fasting and, not eating before you go to bed for a couple of hours is actually a great idea. A big one that's often, again, overlooked is sleep apnea. People think, of the sleep apnea and they think of, an older man who's overweight and snores. I can't tell you how many people. I had this one lady, she couldn't have been more than 80 pounds. She was so tiny, she was so petite. And she had a lot of oral problems, like her teeth were starting to rot out. And anyway, she finally had gotten herself to the dentist. She snored, like, not even enough. I mean, she was so little, I don't even know how she made noise, But she would breathe, like her husband could kind of hear her when she'd be breathing when she was sleeping. Anyway, we had them do a whole sleep apnea test, and it took a while because it went against the perception of people who would have sleep apnea. And so she finally went to the dentist, who then ordered the sleep test. Well, anyway, the long story short was that her airway was so small that it would actually constrict while she was sleeping. And the dentist said this woman is literally suffocating at night. Could you imagine? So again, she doesn't at all meet the criteria. And yet she's probably has the worst case that I've ever heard. There was another gentleman who was using something called an Oura ring, and he was which just basically tells you about your quality of sleep. You've probably all seen it advertised these days on Who and or general TV. So what happened was we were using that as a sort of a motivator, right? We wanted him to be, he had said that he was always, always somebody who never slept well. Since high school, I've never slept well. I get by just fine. Meanwhile, he was like the most like spastic person I'd ever spent time in a room with. And so, when he kept just saying it's normal, I encouraged, well, let's look at your scores. Let's look at your scores. Well, anyway, finally, the Oura Ring score, you want it to be 85 or higher out of 100. And it's just a sleep score that tells you about your quality and how much you slept, and a whole bunch of factors go into it. This man was scoring in the 40s. 40. I mean, he was getting half of what would be normal. Prior to that, I saw some people dip into the 60s, but I mean, it was radically different. And so it was like a wake-up call for him. And so he put his mind to it. He stopped doing so much screen time. He made a handful of changes. But really what he did was he put his mind to the fact that, like, his sleep wasn't okay. And so that he recognized that he needed to optimize it. It was a few weeks later that his wife shared that all of a sudden he started getting into the 70s, and slowly over time he made his way into the 80s. So again, recognize that we need what we need. I know it's a third of our day. It is what it is. Secondly, rule out. So sleep apnea is just one. There can be a few other obstructions that would be in the way of good sleep. So you'd want to see a doctor about that and get that ruled out. And then the third one is make it a priority, right? Make sleep quality a priority. And again, happy to answer any questions about how you could accomplish that. The other 4, so I said there were 7, right? Bredesen 7. The 4 that are left, so there's brain stimulation. So if you're still working and your job is still challenging you, you're probably able to check that box, right? If you're, especially with COVID, we all had to stimulate our brains in order to just function different. We might be in a different rut at this point. That's a different story. There are games. You've probably heard of them. Lumosity, Brain HQ, Elevate, right? These are all different games that you can play on your phone. Some of them are great. Some of them are for fun. If it has you seeing how many umbrellas you can match in an hour, I don't really think that's all that stimulating, but if it's relaxing, hey, go for it, because that's going to check the box for stress management, right? But these other games like Brain HQ, that's the one that has the most research behind it, the one that we use, is actually designed that as you're playing, as you get better, the game gets harder. As you have a couple of bad days, the game will get easier. And so when you think about, for instance, if you started doing a weight routine and you started lifting 2-pound weights, and all of a sudden 2 pounds felt like you could just toss them, they were so easy, you probably wouldn't just keep doing 2 pounds, right? You probably go to the 5-pound weight, right? You would challenge yourself a little bit because it's good for you, and it's how you not only maintain, but it's also how you build something that's healthy. So the games that there are games out there like Brain HQ, Lumosity has a version of it that actually will challenge you in the way that the game is designed. So again, there's real life. So it's learning a new language, learning to dance. Again, things that we have taught in the industry for 20 years, right? This isn't new stuff, but again, we're emphasizing that it's being done now as part of a full package, and that's where you'll really, kind of give all this stuff legs. Mindfulness, it's also sort of related to stress management. So not worrying about everything that's taking place every single day and every single moment about everything in your life, right? But really being able to be present, really being able to having an attitude of thankfulness, of gratitude, not just in a Zen way, but in a truly grateful way. It's not about saying it, it's about truly believing it in your heart and in your mind. Detox, it depends on what your contributors are, right? So for some people, it's healing leaky gut and fixing that. For some people, they've been exposed to mold and it's been a problem for them, and there's an actual detox that needs to take place. We live in the Northeast. For us, Lyme disease is a big issue in this part of the country. So detox is going to be related to your blood work, and what's shown there, will kind of take you down the next road of what that would look like. And then the last component is supplements. So there's times within the protocol that medications are actually prescribed, but a lot of times it's actually just very direct supplements. So this comes in low, you want to hit it here. This comes in high, you take this to offset it. There's a handful of herbs, but for the most part, they're something that's very measurable. There are times when people would be put on prescription. Like I said, it might be hormones, it might be related to detox, it might be thyroid medication. Those are probably the majority categories where you would find that. So those are the 7 things that make up this protocol. You now have your head around it. It's complex. There's a lot to it, but each and every part is the doing it. It's not even necessarily like fully understanding it. And so when I was first training and I first read Dr. Bredesen's book, I tell you, my book is highlighted, dog ears, sticky notes, clothespins. I mean, that book was like something I would walk around like it was a piece of me. And so here I am later, 4 or 5 years later, having practiced with a couple dozen people, and it all makes so much more sense. So I'm still learning too. Every physician I work with is still learning. Dr. Bredesen would tell you that he's still learning, and that there's still more being added to the understanding and the simplification and the kind of streamlining what it is that we're doing here. So if you were kind of coming in here saying, all right, what in the world is it about and how bad it, your mind was sort of floating, I hope now it's sort of saying, okay, there's parameters, right? This is fine. This isn't just, we're going to have to work at this forever. I mean, it will become part of a new lifestyle, but it's not something that you constantly have to be adding new things. And there's times we might recalibrate, right? And we look at, okay, what's been done, what's not working, what do we still have to optimize? Or people go on vacation and they ditch the whole thing for the whole vacation, and they come back and they're like, all right, I got to get back on track, those sort of things. But again, I hope that you can see that it's actually, something that makes sense, which is huge. So for two simple case studies, the first one, we'll call her Danielle. And so Danielle is a woman in her early 60s. She had a couple of head traumas about 10 to 15 years ago. One was a car accident. Felt like things weren't right after that. Naturally, she's just gone through menopause, right? She's kind of just finishing up with that. So all of her hormones have shifted. She also lives in a home that was built back in the 1700s. And so she had a mold problem in her basement it's actually, only part basement, if you will. And she knew that, and she had known something was wrong. She had known something was wrong for 10 years, and she was trying to go to a doctor that would be able to help her get to the bottom of it, and like nobody really had any answers. But she noticed like she was getting brain fog. She was kind of a researcher by nature, so she'd be hours looking on the computer and watching videos and reading books. And so when she came across Dr. Bredesen's work, she begged her physician to read the book and to get trained, who did. Her doctor did all of those things for her. And so that lady, we started working with her with the Bredesen Protocol this past September. In December, we began a mold protocol. We did a consult with the leader in the field, all things mold. His name is Dr. Nathan. And, so today, this woman, she hasn't declined, period. She is more outspoken. She's able to find her words more easily. She's grown in her confidence. So she was sort of nervous about seeing people and nervous about interacting with people if she went to the grocery store that she might know, but she can't remember their name, that sort of thing. She's gained in her confidence that she'll be able to work herself through those situations. We haven't rechecked her MoCA yet. We're due to now. But when she started, she was at a 24. It's pretty obvious. We actually had a consult with her physician in March, and when she left the room, her doctor literally put her hands over her chest and said she's back, because she was the one who was answering the questions. Her husband in the past has been the one who would dominate the conversation, and she would just sort of sit there quietly. Her newest things are that she's trying to help more around the house and be more participatory in the whole protocol. Again, her husband was sort of managing this until that point. She's become a real advocate. So she's part of we have a weekly support group amongst all of our clients, and she's really actually taking a lead role in that. Things that if I could not have predicted it 6 months ago. So soon we'll have some of the data that would go with that, but just as a start, that's where she's at today. This is a woman who has no family history of Alzheimer's disease. She does have one copy of what's called the APOE gene, so she would be about 30% more susceptible to getting it. But she's also just turned 64. She is a young woman who has her whole life ahead of her, or half of her life ahead of her. And so for her, she has the motivation to do anything. She is nearly 100% compliant with everything, with the exception of exercise. She was ruled as having sleep apnea. Again, you'd never know it looking at her, doesn't fit the mold. And in doing this protocol, she's actually begun she hasn't been able to find a mask that would fit her right, and then it leaks and it wakes the husband. So she ended up starting to wear an oxygen ring at night, similar to like like at the hospital, they put it on your finger and it just tells oxygenation. She started wearing that. Guess what? Her sleep apnea has actually gone away. So again, reducing inflammation overall body is actually impacting something like sleep apnea. The second woman is, we'll call her Jane. She lives down in Florida. She's in her early 80s. Her mother died of Alzheimer's disease about last year and had developed it all within her 90s. So she was about 10 years prior to her mom. Traveling saleswoman who reportedly ate nothing but garbage. So Pepsi in one hand, Snickers in the other. And if she got real hungry, she'd stop for French fries. So had an atrocious diet. Started this protocol this past January. So she's still very new to have details. However, she had horrible mood swings. She was in the very beginning stages of the disease. And this past year, she'd go from irate to crying to happy. I mean, just all over the map. And so before she even gets started, I asked their doctor to do a glucose monitor, continuous glucose monitoring. And sure enough, her sugars were all over the place. Just in starting the diet. So it was 2 weeks in, the diet was the only thing she had started. Nothing else had changed. Her son who she lives with, her daughter who helps her, her best friend who's her neighbor, including herself, all reported that actually her mood just stabilized. And when I think about all the people with Alzheimer's disease that I've worked with that have all kinds of moods, and I see the difference that diet made for this woman in 2 weeks, I mean, it's you can't argue with it. Since then, she's continued to regain. I have an email behind the screen that actually says, this is the first email that I've sent in 5 years. Aren't you lucky? And I actually do count myself so incredibly blessed that it would come to me because it's evidence of things that she's able to do. She's slowly regaining skills. So more to come with her because, like I said, she just started a couple of months ago. But oftentimes you will see change in the first 3 to 6 months. It might be small, it might just be a little bit, but guess what? It's not the person declining, which is what would happen. I can tell you from the thousands of people I've worked with is what would happen if we didn't do anything. Side effects, I promised to tell you what they were. I've seen people come off blood pressure medication, come off cholesterol medication, diabetes medication. I had one gentleman who was overweight, had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, on the verge of diabetes, all of it gone. Total picture of health. His doctor's like, if everybody did what he just did, my goodness, look at how far ahead we would be. A lot of people have actually said, you know what, people in their 70s and 80s have said, you know, I've actually never felt this good in my entire life. So just that physical change that takes place as inflammation is reduced, things like arthritis, things like just general pain decreases for people. So then, you know, is it right for you? I'll be honest, I support anybody who chooses to do it. I support anybody who chooses not to. It's a lot. It's a lot to ask somebody to make such changes in their life. It's a lot to ask people to change their diet, to get out and exercise. On the support group, you know, they make a joke about it, but it's true. They joke, you know, we live from supplement to exercise time to when do I have to eat to looking at the clock. One woman said, I didn't retire to do this much work, right? So it's a lot. It's involved. It requires you to be very mindful at all times of different, you know, moving parts. Certainly it gets easier with time, especially as people just adapt it as their new self. I've seen people thriving, oftentimes, especially if it's a spouse, the spouse ends up getting better. They then want to get tested. They want to be able to optimize for themselves. And of course, then it's the thing that they're doing together. And so, you know, for a lot of people who have Alzheimer's disease, one of the things that's hardest for the spouse is that they sort of lose the person premature, right? And they fall into this huge caregiver role. And so I've always taught that, you know, everybody has something to give, even if it's a laugh, but I recognize it's also exhausting a lot of the time. And so with this protocol, because spouses are including the person, I've seen families come together to do it. You know, it helps to share all of that. So now all of a sudden we're eating tons of salad. Well, guess what? You know, my husband's still the one who can wash all the lettuce and break it up, or can, you know, maybe cut some of the vegetables, right? There's still aspects of it that they can do so that it's not just all my burden to carry. So that's pretty unique for people. That said, it's involved. So who are the right people? Those who are doing it for prevention or who already have symptoms are people who are motivated. They're the people who say, you know what, I want to fight it. I don't want to just wait and see, you know, if this is, I don't want to just let the disease take its course or potentially get it because everybody in my family had. So they have a real motivation of why they're doing it. For people who are for prevention, it's more streamlined blood work. It's less blood work. For people who are symptomatic, I'll be honest, it's 40 vials of blood initially. We're checking about 50 to 60 different things that then will get retested over the course of the year as things are worked on. Our program in particular, you can certainly do it yourself. You can buy Dr. Bredesen's book. You can go out and you can put it into practice. That's absolutely an option. For us, we have people who come to us because they say, well, we really want help. It is a lot, and we want to be held accountable, and we want to be part of a network. There's all of maybe 6,000 people in the world, 7,000, let's say, people in the world doing this. You can feel quite alone in a world with 8 billion people. So, the benefits of being part of a team is that, you're motivating each other, you're hearing other people's success, you're getting ideas, all that kind of stuff. So we have monthly or weekly or someplace in between coaching where we're meeting one-on-one and we're slowly taking baby steps through this. We're introducing things purposely in sort of a triage system rather than, okay, run and do all of this and you know where you fall and we'll help pick you up. It doesn't work. I've seen it. I've tried it. It's terrible and it's really discouraging. So instead, we've really kind of paced this for people. And so that's who we work with, and that's what that looks like. Those are just our programs. And so I'm just going to end on this note before we go to questions and answers, that just take it from somebody who has seen more people with Alzheimer's disease than probably everybody else, that it's really exciting that for the first time, I genuinely can tell you that there is something that we can do about Alzheimer's disease. It does not need to be the death sentence that it is. If you think you're prone for it because people in your family have had it or you've done your genetic testing, this does not need to be your future. You have time to be able to change that. And so Dr. Bredesen, I was at a talk with him in LA a couple weeks ago, and the room, there was 400 people in the room, and he said, so out of everyone in this room, 70 of us, according to current statistics, will get Alzheimer's. And he said, what, let's hope none of us get it, because we now actually have the tools and the understanding, and we have what it takes to be able to make that a reality. And so on that note, I just want to thank you again, all of you, for being here again, Gina and Brenda, for hosting this. And I want to turn it back over to Brenda for questions and comments.
Wow, Carrie, thank you. It actually gives you some hope, truly. And before, because I do have some people with questions, I have a question. Why no dairy?
So dairy by itself creates inflammation in people. So sometimes people will argue that like sheep or goat dairy or yogurt might be better. Some of it has to do with the way that the animals are treated, but part of it is just how our system responds to it. So for the average person to have a small bit of it, no big deal, right? But if it's a big part of your diet, it's going to add to that chronic inflammation that we're trying to reduce overall inflammation in the body.
Okay, thank you. So folks, I do welcome you to ask Carrie if you've got questions. You can type it in the Q&A box or the chat box. Let's see, we do have several. Do you or does the book have tracking tools for nutrition, exercise, sleep, or an app?
So great questions. So Dr. Bredesen wrote 2 books. The first one is called The End of Alzheimer's. The second one is called The End of Alzheimer's Program. I definitely recommend the second book for that. As far as an app, there's not a great one out there yet. Dr. Bredesen's group is working on one, but it doesn't really fit the bill yet. If you want to email me, I will happily email you a couple of PDFs for you to go ahead and track it. And the book gives you tons of information of what you want to compare that to. Or obviously, we're happy to help walk you through that as well.
And folks, don't forget at the end, we will put up a slide that has Carrie's contact information. So no worries. We have another question.
We also have this PowerPoint as a PDF, if that's helpful, coming to you by way of Brenda.
That'd be great. Do you find that primary care physicians are cooperative with ordering the lab work? My medical insurance is through a network of providers. To be covered, I have to stay within that network. That's a really good question.
Awesome question. So if you had asked me that 4 years ago, I would have said good luck. I still say good luck, but now I think we have a fighting chance. So here's what I would say about that. the problem is, so genetics, a physician would say, sure, I don't mind, but I don't know what you're going to do with it. Vitamins and nutrients, sure, that seems easy enough. Hormones could be, debatable or a bit controversial. Biotoxin markers, a regular physician has no training what to do with it. So they don't want to order it because if it comes back abnormal, they don't know how to treat it and they don't want to be liable. Heavy metals, kind of in the same category, right? So that's where the hesitancy comes. That said, just last week, we have a client who was like, I don't know which way my doctor is going to swing on this. And her doctor ended up saying to them, listen, the same thing I just said, I don't know what to do with all these labs. If they come back abnormal, I don't want to be responsible. And because I don't want you to be in, danger. So they signed a waiver. Doctor went ahead and ordered it. I'm finding that more and more doctors are willing. It's not always a fun conversation. Like it can be kind of awkward where I have to listen because I've done a lot of speaking with the doctors, or you would too. And the doctors are sort of like, I don't really know why you're doing this. I don't know that I believe in it. I don't know that I agree with it. So it feels a little bit awkward. But in the end, what I've sort of said is, well, it's really it's the client's decision, right? It's your decision. So if you just let the doctor what it is that you need ordered, they might have that conversation with you, but I'm actually finding that nobody's really resisting anymore. Some medical systems won't include all the labs as something that they would order, in which case then they wouldn't be able to order those. But otherwise, you probably have a better chance than you think. So as far as blood work, two options. Dr. Bredesen's first book does a good job of really kind of talking about all the labs. The second book still does a good job. I think the first might do a better job. Or you can email us, and I would be happy to email you. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet that the doctor just has to put your diagnostic codes and sign it. Keep in mind that insurance then may or may not cover it all. Even when you just think labs with general insurance, they may or may not cover it all, just depending on how that rolls out. But there are definitely more options. In addition, there's groups like a group called Life Extension where you can actually purchase it by yourself. So you could just order it outright. And Dr. Bredesen's group for about 700. If it's prevention, it's about 400. It's just over 700 if it's intervention. Well, actually, you can buy the prescription and just have the first set of labs done. So there's definitely a couple of options of how to get that done. But definitely give it a try, for sure.
I have a question. Who is the Bredesen Protocol not good for?
Oh, good question. So for somebody, we had a client recently, to them it was sort of a Hail Mary, that notion of like, well, we'll give it a try. But then, to be honest, everything we had to do along the way was a real struggle. Well, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to do that? What's that going to cost? And it just, it wasn't a great fit, right? The gentleman actually had been declining rapidly. And from the day he started the protocol, he still declined, but it was a very, very slow decline. In fact, on a MoCA score, he scored the same, but functionally he had declined some. Prior to that, the year before, he had dropped 10 points over the course of the year. It's a 30-point test, so a third. So I would say that for people that are sort of like, well, I'd love to try it, but I don't know how we'll do. Honestly, I kind of encourage you, like, get off the fence, go one way or the other. But people who do it middle of the road like that don't succeed. There's a cost component, obviously, right? So supplements and medical testing and some of the devices that you may use, if you used our services or somebody like us, it can range. Probably you're looking at $6,000 or $7,000 a year, up to people who have mold and have to have it remediated that could be spending up to $50,000 a year or more, right? So depending on what the issues are, that's a big component as well. I do know that a lot of people are happy to like get the blood work and kind of see where they stand and maybe make some changes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think you have to go in with the right expectations. So those are my thoughts as far as like even people really advanced. Again, sometimes it comes back to expectations, right? There's plenty of people that would say, gee, if I could just have mom at this stage for a longer time, I would take it, right? So it's not up to me to judge how far along somebody is. It's really a matter of the family and just making sure that what they're hoping for is something that we can achieve.
I have a question. It says, will this work with people who have had strokes on helping build new synapses? Good question.
It is a good question. So yes and no. There's an aspect of this protocol that's going to help the vascular system. So think all of your blood and your arteries and your vessels and all of that. Obviously, the brain has a ton of blood in it. So getting optimal oxygenation to the brain is super helpful. For people who have a stroke, it can help, especially for people who have mini strokes. It can be helpful. There's some people who do this protocol and their physician will actually order for them to go into a hyperbaric oxygen treatment. So it's basically just getting pure oxygen pushed into the brain. You're sort of in a picture a tanning booth, but that doesn't open. And so, for 20 minutes, you just have all this oxygen that's pumped out. It's like being underwater. And that can be very helpful. So there's different aspects, right? For somebody who's had a stroke, we want to maximize all vascular systems. So there's aspects of the diet that will help, aspects of exercise, obviously, aspects of sleep, right? Because it's restoration and cleaning out and getting rid of garbage and maximizing functioning. Obviously, getting rid of sleep apnea, because that starves people oxygen to the brain. So there are definitely positive things for a person who has a stroke. Keep in mind that the protocol itself was designed for people with Alzheimer's. I've worked with people with Parkinson's. I've worked with frontal temporal. I've worked with strokes, Lewy body. Everybody's a little bit different. And so for people, if it's mild cognitive impairment or it's dementia or Alzheimer's, it's a pretty clear, like, the system is the same. What might be causing it might be different, but the system is clear. So for some of the other ones, we just have to go back to the drawing board, because genetics may not be a problem, but people with frontal temporal, for instance, shouldn't do a large fast because the way that their brain is utilizing sugar changes. So there's aspects that can be a little different. And so I would say stroke is in that category, like if that's what's causing, if that's what the main issue is. So yes, it's helpful, but I wouldn't just take it full on at face value.
So Carrie, you talked a little bit about prices, but I do have a question. What is the estimated cost for the prevention program?
So again, you could purchase the book, go get your labs done. It is whatever the doctor, whatever your copays are, they are. Supplements will still probably run you, let's say $250 to $300 a month. Could be less, potentially. You're going to make a change potentially in diet. So food costs might be a little bit higher, buying more quality food compared to what you might be doing now. Exercising, if you're doing it on your own, super. If you choose to get a trainer or have to incur a gym membership, that would be an additional cost. Ruling out things like sleep apnea would generally be covered by insurance, so you wouldn't have to worry about that cost. And then just depending on what it is, right? So again, for that person, if it turns out there's Lyme already in the system, it's prevention, but you still need to get rid of it. Or if it's a mold toxicity, you still need to get rid of it. People who are in prevention, but maybe going through menopause, women in particular, toxins are stored in our not only our fat, but they're stored in our bones. And so as women go through menopause, right, these hormones are dropping, right, because that's what happens in menopause. And then in addition, the bones are breaking down. And so all these toxins are getting released. And so that's why you hear a lot of women in menopause talk about brain fog, or that's why you see this influx of women in menopause ages or just after that are now developing Alzheimer's. So for them, they would need to see a specialist about maybe hormone replacement therapy, right? So even though it's prevention, we might still be looking at a couple $1,000s to $10,000 or $20,000, right? And then add to that, if you choose to work with a team like ours, right, that would be an additional cost as well. Or if you decide to work with a nutritionist, right, related to this. So it can vary, but I would argue that it has potential to just be probably all in. If you really partook all services, you could be looking at maybe $10,000, $12,000 for the year.
Okay, thank you. Okay, folks, looks like we're at that time. It's 7:30. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to thank our speaker, Carrie Mills Rutland, and I want to thank my colleague, Gina Forgione. Gina is behind the scenes, don't look behind the curtain. We couldn't do it without her, so thank you, Gina. Want to ask you to please stay on for a minute or two. Again, at the end, Gina will put up an end slide. It will have Carrie's contact information. I know some of you still have some questions. You can email her directly. Thank you so much. And please remember, if you need to contact the Kensington, 914-390-0080. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.